This time on Poll Hub, perhaps one of the surest signs we are moving past the pandemic is mass shootings in the United States have resumed. 2 in 2 weeks, the latest in Boulder, Colorado, where 10 people were murdered in a supermarket, leading to the inevitable question among gun control advocates, will this be enough to enact common sense gun laws? We will discuss. Then drip, 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 do you hear that? We're checking back on New York Governor Andrew Cuomo as new questions continue to arise about his handling of the pandemic and his dealings with women. Do his constituents want him to resign? We're taking a look. So lots to talk about. Let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
And I'm Miringoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion.
For the last couple of years before the pandemic, we had the unfortunate we were in the unfortunate position every few weeks on the podcast of having to start with a somber note, it seemed like, about a mass shooting. And I think one of the things that people didn't realize over the last year with all of the horrible things going on was there were essentially no mass shootings in the United States. And now in 2 weeks, we've had two, one in the Atlanta area, 8 people killed there. Most recently in Boulder, Colorado, 10 people killed there. And as we noted at the top, there is the familiar cry now for, will something happen to restrict anything to do with guns? Maybe assault weapons, which were used in both of these cases, or background checks. And it's hard not to be incredibly cynical with the answer.
Well, I think what's really interesting is there has been a consensus on this issue among Americans for a very long time. I think we can certainly, go back and forth, on the debate of, how much regulation people do want in terms of guns, but there are very specific changes that can occur that most people are in agreement with, and including a majority of Republicans. Just a couple things. You mentioned, Jay, background checks for private gun sales at gun shows. This is something that has a majority support among Americans. 93, I shouldn't even say majority. I mean, it's an overwhelming consensus among Americans. 93% of Democrats, 82% of Republicans. Banning high-capacity magazines, 87% of Democrats, 54% of Republicans. Banning assault-style weapons, 88% of Democrats, 50% of Republicans. So it's been an incredible dynamic that we have had in Washington to federalize some of these laws, as opposed to leaving it up to states and localities, which obviously have not been the answer or have been able to stem the tide. It'll be interesting to see with the Democrats, having at least sort of control in the Senate, by one, and certainly they are not of one mind at all. But it's interesting to see if the changes that we've seen in Washington since November will end up having a change on this issue as well.
Well, you do have, obviously, the White House is going to be speaking like the White House did during the Obama years and during the Clinton years, for that matter, earlier on. But there is the 60 votes. As long as the filibuster remains in place, you need 60 votes. That means 10 Republicans if you carry all Democrats in the Senate, which I don't think is a foregone conclusion. But I think when you look at public opinion, as these poll numbers suggest, we also see that guns have not been the number one issue. It gets a huge media attention, which lasts for a couple days, usually, maybe a little bit more. It's not sustained, but it's not a voting issue either. So if you're in the Senate and you're in the House of Representatives, you almost feel that you can sort of not do what public opinion says you should be doing
it's not a voting issue for one side, but it is for another. It's much like abortion has been an issue that has driven conservatives to the polls. And so Republicans, if you look at Republicans in the electorate and say, well, they support an assault weapons ban, how come senators and House members that are Republicans don't? Well, you got to say, okay, wait a second. In a primary, what happens? And what happens is the most active voters show up, and the most active voters in Republican primaries, and there's similar ones in Democrats on different issues. The most active Republican primary voters are animated by single issues like guns or abortion. And so, I think it's easy to say, why aren't Republicans following Republican voters? Or, why aren't Democrats following Democratic voters on other issues? But that's not how this works, because people don't get elected by the majority. Even if it's a majority where 60 or 70% turnout, that doesn't necessarily mean a majority of the people who live in the country support that. It's simply a majority who turns out. When we're talking about primaries, we're talking about 10, 15% turnout, you're talking about a tiny fraction of the electorate who care about something very much that drive the agenda.
Yeah, I see a little parallel also to the coronavirus debate, in that, there are facts to be brought to bear. For example, the United States is not doing a good job with gun control. We have an enormous number, much greater gun violence than other, comparable nations elsewhere, including our neighbor to the north in Canada and a lot of other countries. We have an epidemic, not a pandemic, but a gun epidemic of violence, such that, we lose more people to gun violence in a year, roughly the same number as breast cancer or pancreatic cancer and other things. So the United States, we're not doing well. I also think we're maybe suffering a little bit from numbers fatigue. With the pandemic, we hear all these numbers, and I just said a few, and maybe it's just not resonating. But also, there isn't, some answer to this. We saw when Bill Clinton banned assault weapons in 1994, shooting deaths dropped significantly. When the Republican Congress allowed the ban to expire in 2004, they went skyrocketing up again. So, let's put some facts on the table. The ban on assault weapons has, I would argue, nothing to do with the Second Amendment. The guns are being used for this are not really the kind of hunting issues, and we see, even on the, what's going on in the Capitol, what went on January 6th. How many guns do we want floating around right now as a society? And more guns mean more deaths by guns, and that seems to be the reality, even if we don't necessarily want to act on it.
On the facts part, America does have more guns than people. I think the latest numbers are about 120 guns per 100 residents. So it's a bit more guns than people, and that says a lot given the proportion of people who don't own a single gun. But what do you guys also say to um, you know the argument that that this really shouldn't be a federal issue, that this is something that should be um, addressed from locale to locale, perhaps state to state, um, recognizing, that, some of those things haven't worked, but there are also, there are gun laws that have been effective at the local level.
I think the problem with that is that that people who oppose gun regulations are generally opposed to that because they don't believe that New York, for instance, if I'm from Arkansas and I can do anything I want, I should be able to go to New York and do whatever I want with a gun because of the Second Amendment. So the support for the idea that state laws can deal with some of that doesn't come from that side. I do think that state laws run into the issue of state courts, as we saw in Colorado. Boulder had passed a law restricting or limiting the assault weapons, and yet an assault weapon was used because 10 days prior, not because, the assault weapon could have been used whether it was illegal or not. 10 days prior, a state court in Colorado overturned Boulder's law. So, I think that the notion that these things can be controlled or handled at the state level also it kind of ignores the fact that States in many cases are close together. Certainly not in, Alaska versus Hawaii. Then, you take a plane to get there. But if you are in Virginia and you can buy any gun, you can be in New York in 6 hours. So who cares if New York has a super strict law, right? And that, in fact, is what I-95 has been the gun corridor for years, as a flow of illegal weapons, illegal in New York, legal in South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, flow north into New York City. So I don't know. I get back to the question we asked at the beginning: is this the time? I mean, if it didn't happen after Sandy Hook, if it didn't happen after name, just fill in the blank. Do we really expect it to happen now? I think this is the Nixon in China thing. So here's my editorializing lead. I think it will require a Republican president to do this. I don't think a Democratic president, because we're never going to have 60 senators that are Democrats, probably in our lifetime, the way things are, the way that gerrymandering and everything goes, and the way that the Senate is set up to favor lower population states. It just seems like it's going to require a Republican to take that on, in the same way that it took a Democrat in Bill Clinton to talk about welfare reform, and it took Nixon going to China to open up China.
But one thing we are going to get, and this is like, you can't, as you said, help but be cynical. When things like this occur, what happens? Prepare for a surge in gun sales, because people think that, now they're coming to take our guns, and I better get another, AK-15 or whatever before.
AR-15, AK-47. It's okay.
Yes, okay, yes. But anyway, so
Lee does not own one of these weapons. I think we know that now.
You knew it was a number, didn't you, Lee? You always think numbers have an error margin.
Yeah, when we go to a sales surge, and that's one of the outcomes of moments like this, as bad or as ironic as that can be. But anyway.
Well, this week, as New Yorkers, we have also been watching Governor Andrew Cuomo spending a lot of time talking about the coronavirus and opening up different aspects of New York, and ignoring perhaps what has also been going on in the New York State Assembly, in committee at least, and that is conducting an impeachment investigation regarding several sexual harassment allegations. And I think even, I don't want to say more significantly, to undermine the importance of those concerns and those issues, but his troubles actually started with his handling of the nursing home deaths this time last year, which was originally the bad news that he was getting in the tabloids and the press, and the fact that his administration had, had not been transparent about the number of deaths that had been occurring in nursing home. What has gotten traction, though, for impeachment are these issues, of sexual misconduct and sexual harassment against several women who've come forward, both former staff people, I believe one also staff person, current staff person. So, guys, is this the end of Andrew Cuomo's political career again, I should say?
Yeah, well, yeah. Many years ago, before he was governor, people had already counted him out, and he came off the canvas. This is a different situation, though. I mean, this is, he's in his third term. He's certainly not created a whole pile of friends along the way. I mean, there's not a lot of people coming to his defense. In fact, I'm not sure I can think of any. We know
Charlie Rangel.
There you go. I know from our February poll, which is a while ago, and there have been other polls since, we saw on the nursing home that 60% of New Yorkers thought that he had either done something illegal or unethical. So he was already having problems, and most people were not necessarily willing to give him another shot at re-election. And that was before, as you point out, Barb, all the sexual harassment accusations came forward. So I think Governor Andrew Cuomo has some major problems, and that may be understatement.
That I do think that may be the understatement, certainly, of this podcast. And I don't know, We're on episode 189. I think that might rank up there in the top 10 of understatements on Poll Hub. Two polls have been out more recently than ours. Folks we like at Quinnipiac and Siena. And what strikes me about these is that there are no numbers that are good for Cuomo in either of them, save one. So a majority say, yeah, he screwed up on the nursing homes. A majority say, yeah, the sexual harassment allegations are true. His favorability rating is really quite low. It's under 40% in both of these. Nobody wants to.
Although, truth be told, I mean, it was never terribly high.
No, most people don't want to see him run for re-election for a fourth term, which would have been a heavy lift, already. But when asked, should he resign? So look, we don't like the governor. We don't think he's done a good job. We think he's screwed up on this, that, and the other thing. We think he should resign. There's still not a majority that think he should resign. And, Andrew Cuomo knows how to read polls very well. And I mean, he's looking at those numbers. We found the same thing when we asked the question, why would he resign if a majority of his constituents don't think he should resign? Who cares what the assembly says? I mean, I'm speaking as him. Who cares what the assembly says or the Senate says?
Although the numbers have trended downward. I mean, as each revelation, as you started with the drip, 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 each drip has caused him some points in popularity as well.
But he's at 49 or 50%, depending on the poll, at should not resign. I'd rather be there than at 40% saying, at 60% saying you should resign or 50% saying you should resign.
Well, has the bar changed? I mean, he's not the only governor to run into trouble of late. Actually, most of the governors who were riding high, I'm thinking of the California governor who were riding high last year, guiding their states through the pandemic, have certainly been in hot water since. But I'm just thinking of all the scandals that we've had, both in terms of sexual misconduct, sexual harassment, um, you know, money, fiscal issues. Have has something changed where perhaps Americans have more tolerance, at least for the guy who's on their partisan side?
The only thing I'm reacting to on that is if you look at the way the Republicans in Congress supported Donald Trump, Andrew Cuomo was not getting that support from Democrats in New York State Assembly or Senate. So Democrats seem to be rougher on their wrongdoing leaders than the Republicans were in Congress.
Well, yes and no. There was a lieutenant governor in Virginia who is in deep doo-doo, and he is still in office. And that was a technical term. He's still in office, and a majority of voters in that state did not think he should resign at the time. I think there's no denying that if you look at Al Franken and other cases, Democrats have been tougher than Republicans in similar circumstances. That being said, I think Barb's point is correct. Whose team is he on? Now I'll tell you whether he should resign or not, or what I think of his actions. This is a very democratic state. And when 50% of the voters are saying that he shouldn't resign, that means a lot of Democrats are saying he shouldn't resign. They may not like what he's doing, but you can't help. I think you can't help but say at least a little that it has to do with, well, he's on my team. It's like being a Patriots fan, right? Yeah, so they cheated. So what?
But is it possible that when the results of some of these investigations do eventually come out, that if the findings are not favorable towards the governor, are some of these numbers going to change a little bit more? And is the bigger question is, what about 2022? I mean, the chances of him seeking re-election and being successful, I think it gotten very steep right now.
Yeah, I mean, if we've asked that, and these most recent polls have asked it as well. And there's a majority who don't want to see him running in 2022. Fourth term is hard to do anyway. So yeah, I think he's taking it day by day, pretty clearly.
And also trying to change the discussion and the agenda. I mean, he has taken a very different tact on the pandemic and the economic closures that we have seen throughout the past year in the state. And he is making those changes daily. He's making those changes quickly. And he's trying, I think, to refocus attention on the economy.
And it's 18 months away. I think it's a little premature to write him off, and it's also premature to say there's no possible way that he or no. I think it's premature to write him off, and it's also premature to say this guy's got a really good chance at winning if he ran in 2022. 18 months.
Yeah, and Elliot Spitzer, client number 9 from an earlier era, regretted resigning after the fact. And Andrew Cuomo says at this point he's not going anywhere. So we'll see how that plays out. He may be taking a page from Spitzer's lamentations, regrets.
Or from another guy from Queens. Come on.
Oh boy. Get those cards and letters coming in, folks. It's a big borough you just took out.
Oh, no. It's just the fact that they may have a lot in common.
A lot in common. So Lee, how about that segue to your fun fact?
Oh, yes. And here we thought we were wrapping up. Well, here we go, really quickly. Fun fact, yeah, we went back in 1940, and this is actually an interesting one, I think. Gallup asked the question, do you have a telephone in your home where you live? And the answer was 50 yes, 50 no, which explains why in the early part of polling, you had to go face-to-face to your interviews. You couldn't do it by phone because you were missing half the country, and you can't do polling that way. Things changed in the 50s, 60s, and 70s as phones became more universal. And now, we have all kinds of other gizmos that we've talked about. But in 1940, you couldn't do a telephone poll with any kind of dependability.
Wasn't Gallup still doing face-to-face polls into the 70s part? I think we ran across numbers in the late 70s
Yes,
for one of the
absolutely.
projects we were working on, and they were face-to-face polls during the Carter administration.
Absolutely. Because in the 1970s, there was a monopoly on telephone service. Uh, those of us old enough to remember Ma Bell before the breakup, um, uh, there was really no one list that pollsters could get a hold of. And pollsters were actually I believe they were from CBS. Our late friend, Warren Matofsky, uh, basically sued under Freedom of Information Act in the late 1970s to allow access to telephone numbers, to public telephone numbers, those that were already listed in telephone books around the country. And that's when telephone polling took off, including the Marist Poll.
And that's going to do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in beautiful Poughkeepsie, New York. I'm Mary Griffith and Poll Hub's executive producer. Thanks so much for joining us today. Rounding out our production team are Casey Schaff, our production supervisor, Amelia Morell, our production assistant, and Marcello Bettman, our trusted editor. Of course, thanks to the Roper Center Archive at Cornell University. They provide us with the ability to look back at survey questions and results over the decades. And if you have questions or comments, reach out to us on social media. We're at Marist Poll on Twitter and Marist Poll on Facebook and Instagram. Finally, if you like what you hear on Poll Hub, please consider leaving us a review on your podcasting app of choice. Positive reviews help others find us. And while you're at it, why not go ahead and subscribe? Again, thanks for being here. We'll catch you next week.